Welcome, believers. Welcome, conspiracy theorists. Welcome to the wonderfully weird world of the Tinfoil Hat Fan Club, where we talk about all the batshit crazy stuff that goes on in the world, and there is loads. Okay, look, on last week's episode, and if you haven't checked it out, please do, we talked about the 1952 UFO wave, and we did talk about army bases, military bases being buzzed by UFOs. So on today's episode, I would like to take that a little bit further and talk about the Malmstrom incident, okay, where UFOs buzzed military bases, but turn their weapons off as well, shut down their missiles. So stick around, and I'll tell you all about it. Okay then. Okay. When did UFOs buzz army bases and shut down their weapons? Okay, look. So in central Montana, it's called the Malmstrom Airforce Base, okay? So in central Montana, Thursday morning, March the 16th, 1967, Captain Eric Carlson and First Lieutenant Walt Fidel, the Echo Flight Missile Command Crew, were below ground in the Echo Flight Launch Control Center, or capsule as they call it. The Echo Flight LCC was located between Winfred and Hilga, about 15 miles north of Lewiston. So, missile maintenance crews and security teams were camped out at two of the launch facilities, the LFSs, okay, launch facilities, having performed some work during the previous day and stayed there overnight. Now, during the early morning hours, more than one report came in from the security patrols and maintenance crew that they had seen UFOs, all right? A UFO was reported directly above one of the E-flight silos. It turned out that at least one security policeman was so affected by this encounter that he never again returned to missile security duty. Around 8:30 a.m., Fidel, the deputy crew commander, was briefing Carlson, the crew commander, right, remember these names, on the flight status when the alarm horn sounded. One of the missiles they supervised had gone off alert, become inoperable. It was one of the two sites where maintenance crews had camped out the night before. Upset, thinking that the maintenance personnel failed to notify him, as required by procedure when maintenance work is done on a missile, that the missile was going off alert status, Fidel immediately called the missile site. When Fidel spoke with the on-site security guard, he reported that they had not yet performed any maintenance that morning. He also stated that a UFO had been hovering over the site. However, now other missiles started to go off alert in rapid succession, and within seconds, the entire flight of 10 ICBMs was down. All of the missiles reported a no-go condition. Now, one by one across the board, each missile had become inoperable. When the checklist procedure had been completed for each missile site, it was discovered that each of the missiles have gone off alert status due to a guidance and control system fault. Power had not been lost to the site. The missiles were simply not operational because, for some unexplained reason, each of their guidance and control systems had malfunctioned on all of them, right? Two security alert teams, SATs, were dispatched from Echo to those sites where the maintenance crews were present. Now, Fidel had not informed the strike teams that the on-site guards had reported a UFO. Okay, he left that to himself. On arrival at the LFs, the SAT reported that UFOs had been seen hovering over each of the two sites by all the maintenance team and security personnel at the time. So these UFOs were seen by everyone. Captain Don Crawford's crew relieved the Echo Flight crew later that morning, so they were taking over the shift. Crawford recalls that both Carlson and Fidel was still visibly shaken by what had occurred. Now, Crawford also recalled that the maintenance crews worked on the missiles that entire day and late into the night during his shift to bring them all back on alert. Not only had the missiles been lost to our deterrent forces, whatever they have been, but have remained out of service for an entire day. Now, because of this unique incident, an ex-missiler described it as all hell had broke loose. You can imagine, can't you? All 10 missiles had gone down. Among the many calls to and from the E-Flight LCC was one to the officer of Oscar Flight, which links to the equally dramatic story of what happened in another base at the same time. Right, so Oscar Flight is another base, about 20 miles away. Now, Oscar Flight was a base located a mile or two south of a town called Roy, about 20 miles southeast of Echo Flight Base, right? The following is told by Robert Salas, and I will stick his picture there, right? He is the witness to what happened, right? Robert Salas was the officer in O Flight that morning. Okay, right. This is his own words, and I will try to do it some justice, right? He says, my recollection is that I was on duty as a Deputy Missile Combat Crew Commander below ground in the base during the morning hours of the 16th of March 1967. He said, above the subterranean base capsule, it was a typical clear, cold Montana night sky. There were a few inches of snow on the ground. Where we were, there were no city lights to detract from the spectacular array of stars, and it was not uncommon to see shooting stars. Montana is called the Big Sky Country, and it's called for a reason. Now, an airman on duty topside probably spent most of their time outside looking at the stars because, let's face it, there's little else to do, isn't there, really? It was one of those airmen who first saw what appeared to be a star beginning to zigzag across the sky, right? Then he saw another light do the same thing, and this time it was larger and closer. He asked his flight security controller, the FSC, and the non-commissioned officer, NCO, in charge of Launch Control Centre site to come and take a look. They both stood there watching the light streak above them, stop, change directions at high speed, and then return overhead. Right, the NCO ran into the building and phoned me at my station in the underground capsule. He reported to me that they had just been seeing lights making strange manoeuvres over the facility, and they weren't aircraft. So I replied, great. You just keep watching them and let me know if they get any closer. Now, the reason I said that is I didn't take the report seriously and directed him to report back if anything more significant happened. At the time, I believed this was some sort of a joke. But saying that, still, that sort of behaviour was definitely out of character for air security policemen whose communications with us were very, very professional. So, a few minutes later, the security NCO called again. This time he was clearly frightened and was shouting his words. He said, sir, there's one hovering outside the gate. And I said, one what? A UFO. It's just sitting there. We're all just looking at it. What do you want us to do? Well, what's it look like? I can't really describe it. It's glowing red. What are we supposed to do? So I said, make sure the site is secure and I'll phone the command post. Sir, I have to go now. One of my guys have just been injured. Before I can ask about the injury, he was off the line. Now, I immediately went over to my commander, Lieutenant Fred Mewald, who was on a scheduled sleep period. I woke him and began to brief him about the phone call and what was going on topside. Now, in the middle of this conversation, we both heard the first alarm klaxon resound through the consigned space of the capsule, and both immediately looked over the panel of annunciator lights at the commander's station. A no-go light and two red security lights were lit, indicating problems at one of our missile sites. Now, Fred jumped up to query the system to determine the cause of the problem. Before he could do so, another alarm went off at another site, then another simultaneously. Within the next few seconds, we had lost 6 to 8 missiles to a no-go inoperable condition. Now, after reporting this incident to the command post, I phoned my security guard. He said that the man had approached the UFO, had not been injured seriously, but was being evacuated by helicopter to the base. Now, once topside, I spoke directly with the security guard about the UFOs. He added that the UFO had a red glow and appeared to be saucer-shaped. He repeated that it had been immediately outside the front gate, hovering silently. We sent a patrol to check out the LFs after the shutdown, and they reported sighting another UFO during that patrol. They also lost radio contact with our site immediately after reporting the UFO. Remember, this is his words, right? When we were relieved by our scheduled replacement crew later that morning, the missiles had still not been brought online by on-site maintenance teams. Again, UFOs have been sighted by security personnel at or about the time Minutemen's strategic missile shutdown. Okay, remember that. So after all this palaver, an investigation was obviously raised, right? An in-depth post-incident investigation of the E-flight incident was undertaken. Full-scale on-site and laboratory tests at the Boeing Company's Seattle plant was conducted. Declassified strategic missile wing documents and interviews with ex-Boeing engineers who conducted the tests following the E-flight incident investigation confirmed that no cause for the missile shutdowns were ever found. Robert Kaminsky was the Boeing Company engineering team leader for the investigation. Kaminsky stated that after all tests were done, there was no significant failure, engineering data, or findings that would explain how 10 missiles were knocked off alert, and there was no technical explanation that could explain the event. All right, so after looking into it, they couldn't find anything. The most that could be done was to reproduce the effects by introducing a 10-volt pulse onto a data line. Another Boeing Company engineer on the team, a Robert Regard, came up with the pulse that repeated the shutdown effects 80% of the time, but only when directly injected at the logic coupler. No explanation could be found for a source of such a pulse occurring in the field and getting it inside the shielded missile system equipment. So they managed to reproduce the shutdown, but to a limited amount. I mean, they put a 10-volt pulse into the logic coupler, whatever that is, but we'll go into that in a minute, right? And 80% of the time, it did shut the missiles down. Now, no explanation could be found for a source of the pulse of noise, like I said, because they're shielded, all right? Others on the engineering team checked other possibilities, right? Lighting and problems in the commercial power system were looked into as a source of the problem. William Dutton, another Boeing Company engineer, checked commercial power interruptions and stated no anomalies were found in this area, so it couldn't be that. Several military activities and other engineering firms participated in the investigation, but no positive calls for the shutdowns were ever found, despite extensive and concentrated efforts. One conclusion was that the only way a pulse or noise could be sent in from outside the shielded system was through an an EMP pulse from an unknown source. The technology of the day made generating an EMP of such sufficient magnitude to enter the shielded system a very difficult proportion indeed. It requires heavy, bulky equipment. The source of the actual pulse that caused the missile shutdown remains a mystery to this day. But does it? I mean, we know where that EMP strike come from. It came from the UFOs, didn't it? Right, so just to collaborate and build up more of an argument or proof that there were UFOs out there, there were other sightings around the area, okay? Now, according to articles from the Great Falls Tribune newspaper on February 8th, 1967, Louis DeLon saw two strange objects in the sky which did not look like aeroplanes, and they glowed an orange and red colour while driving home from Montana, 10 miles east of Chester. Jake Walkman was awakened by a bright light at his home. From his backyard, he sighted a flying saucer-shaped object. The next evening, George Cowanci, a foreman for the Great Northern Railroad, saw a bright ball of light in the sky directly above Chester train depot. These are just but a few of sightings which preceded the missile shutdown incident later in March. Now, look, what do you think? What do you think of this situation? Do you think that it was UFOs? All right, it was during this same period, according to Colonel Don Crawford, that a two-person SAT assigned to Echo Flight was performing a routine check on the missile launch facilities a few miles north of Lewiston, Montana. As they approached one of the launch facilities, an astonishing sight caused the driver to slam on his brakes. Stunned in amazement, they watched as about 300 feet ahead, a very large glowing object hovered silently directly over the launch vicinity. Right, one of them picked up his hand microphone and called then Captain Don Crawford, who was the officer on duty that evening. He said, "Sir, you won't believe what I'm looking at," he said. I'm sure he said it a lot more panicked than that. He described what he was seeing. Right, Crawford didn't believe him at first, but the young airman insisted he was telling the truth. And his voice revealing his emotional state kind of proved the point. Eventually, Crawford took him serious enough to call the command post to report it. Now, this is interesting, right? The officer on duty at the command post refused to accept the report and simply stated, "We no longer record these kinds of reports," indicating he didn't want to talk about UFOs. I mean, Crawford, unsure what to tell his shaken security guard, decided to give the guard permission to fire his weapon at the object if it seems hostile. And his response was, "Thanks, sir, but I really don't think that would do any good." Luckily, a few seconds later, the object simply flew away. There were sightings in the area before and after the missile shutdown incidents by military personnel and civilians all over the place. So, look, national security. During events of the morning of 1967, UFOs were sighted by security personnel at the Oscar Flight LCC and one O-Flight LF, and by other security and maintenance personnel at Echo Flights. These sightings were reported separately to capture crews at both LCCs at or about the same time the Minuteman strategic missiles shut down at both sites. So the US Air Force have confirmed that all Echo Flight missile shutdowns within seconds of each other and that no cause could be found. So it's weird, isn't it? Because for many years, the Air Force has maintained that no reported UFO incident has ever affected national security. It is an established fact that a large number of Air Force personnel reported seeing UFOs at the time many of our strategic missiles become unlaunchable. The incident described above clearly has national security implications. What do you think? What do you think? I mean, this goes back to 1967. Like I say, at the moment with the orbs and the drones and all that sort of stuff, I'm not saying this isn't a massive wave. That's why I talked about the 1952 wave. It's just not unusual. So it makes you think that maybe in 67, when these UFOs were shutting down the missiles, they were basically telling us that we are kids with matches and we should put those matches down. What do you think? Anyway, look, drop me a line. I know some of you do, and I really, really appreciate it. It's fantastic. Thank you. So, look, like and subscribe. Ding that notification bell if you can, and you'll hear my other videos. But this was UFOs buzzing military bases. So, check me out next time, ring the notification bell, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks very much.